Today, we're looking at Robert Oster's Moss. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Robert Oster's Moss is a green ink. Thankfully, because it's moss. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I put the ink into a different pen per day. I then put it into a Levenger True Writer with a broad nib to take my notes for this video. Now before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it in the water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see is really interesting because we see this really light kind of pink color, a little bit of some browns in there, some greens, and a light blue across the top. It's a very complex ink in its mix, which makes it pretty interesting to me. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. Now that line across the bottom, that kind of pink magenta-y tone now, is darker and more pronounced and there. The green started leaving itself behind earlier. We see less of the browns, and that blue line across the top is still very bright and there. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it handles itself pretty well. It does spread out to become about a medium, but it stays completely legible. So as long as your writing is a little spread out, if you had to highlight your notes with this ink, you should feel pretty safe. Water reactivates and lifts almost all the inks. We do see on the left edge of that circle the beginnings of white of the paper coming through, which is good news. It makes me feel like water, all we're going to need. That's only a 30-second drop. Pen flesh did everything that water did, and that's it, nothing more. We do see some of the beginnings of the white of the paper coming through, but again, I'm going to go with water is all you're going to need. 1/3 bleach solution completely removes it from the page, but please do not use a 1/3 bleach solution to get this ink out of your pen. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5. with a realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Robert Oster's Moss has a viscosity of 2.73, making it normal. That's the drier side of normal, but normal. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper with the extra fine and medium nib. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Robert Oster's Moss has an average dry time of 12 seconds, making it a little bit faster than normal. A little bit of a faster drying ink. Now, let's look at the writing samples. I picked this ink up in sample form, and wow, I'm zoomed way in. There we go. And to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at Clairefontaine. Can't stand messy papers. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade. The extra fine has no feather spread, halo sheen. It has shade spots. The top of the K looks a little bit darker. The brown looks dark and then light at the top and then dark, and then WN gets light. The fox is a mid-tone the whole way. Over is very light. The is very dark. It does offer some shading with the extra fine. Not standout shading, but it is there. It is nice. 8 seconds to dry. The medium has no feather spread, halo sheen, and the same kind of shading we see with the extra fine. Quick looks very dark, brown starts very dark and then gets a little light, fox starts light and gets dark. Now I didn't talk about the tones of these because the tones are the same. They're really basically the same, although oddly these two showed shading that this one doesn't. The medium took 11 seconds to dry. Now, the extra fine and medium scrubby showed no color variation, although we got some in the writing sample. And the smear test says you could likely recover it. Tomoe River. We get no bleeding. We get ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. None. It looks dusty on this paper. The extra fine has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade. Again, it's a dusty green here. It's a slightly lighter tone than we saw with the 1.1. 14 seconds to dry. Slightly darker tone on the medium than we see with the extra fine. It's like one tone down from the 1.1, and the extra fine's like one tone down from the medium. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade, 19 seconds to dry. All of them look nice and dusty. It's a nice dusty green here. It looks nice. The scrubby for both show no color variation. We didn't expect it. We didn't get it. And the smear test, you couldn't recover this if you smeared it. So, Rhodia, no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen. It has some shading. Like the O is a little lighter than the rest of Oster. The R is a little lighter than the rest of Robert. But that's about it. Couple light spots. The extra fine, same tone of green with no feather, spread, halo, sheen, more shading. The Q in Quick is darker than the whole middle of Quick, and the K is very dark. The brown is dark, or the B is darker in brown than the rest of brown, and the X in Fox is darker than the rest of Fox. So that's nice that it's happening there. The right here is much darker than the words around it. 7 seconds to dry. Medium, same tone as the extra fine. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, same type of shading. Same type of shading going on. Fox starts very dark, gets a little light, gets dark again. Jump starts light and gets then gets very dark. Okay, so we have spots of shading that are pleasant to see. They're not standout, they're very subtle. 10 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby of the extra fine and the medium showed no color variation, although we did get some color variation in the writing samples. In the smear test, you could likely recover it. So TWSBI notebook paper. This is my preferred notebook to use for my ink journal to know what ink is in a pen, which has been very useful lately, as I have at times, I try to keep my pens inked to about 5, but at times over the last couple weeks I've had a lot. I've been not as good at cleaning out my pens. No bleeding, no ghosting. I like this paper though. Even though it's not perfect in a lot of ways, I do like this paper and I really like their notebooks. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen. It does offer some shading. The Rob is darker than the Ert. The left side of the O is lighter than the rest of Oster. So it does offer a little bit of shading there, which is kind of nice. The extra fine has the same tone that we see with the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen. It does offer some shading, like the H in the is a little darker than the rest of the word. The left side of Quick is darker than the rest of Quick, and the K is darker. Fox starts light and gets dark. The is a very dark word, and over is a very light word. So it's got nice shading throughout here. 6 seconds to dry. I am going way out of focus. Go into manual. Taking the wheel myself. The medium, darker tone, the darkest tone we see here. It's got no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade whatsoever with that darker tone. 9 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby of the extra fine shows a little bit of color variation, looking far left to far right. Not a whole lot, but that's about what we did see up here, not a whole lot. The medium shows none, we got none, and the smear test, you could likely recover it. Moleskin. Moleskin doesn't do well. It didn't do horrible with the extra fine. It did have a lot of bleed spots. It did not bleed through and touch the page underneath. You could use the back of the page with the extra fine. You could not use the back of the page with a medium. The medium up top, it has feathering, gross feathering, all over the place. It does not spread. It doesn't have halo, sheen, or shade. The extra fine, it has feathering all over it. Tiny little feathering all over it. That being said, if this is your carrying around notebook and this is the ink in your pen, I think you'd be able to get away with it, tear the page out, act like it never happened, and don't tell anybody, but you'd be able to use it. No halo, no sheen, no shade. It didn't spread. 2 seconds to dry. The scrubby shows us no color variation. We didn't get any color variation.
And a smear test, why this would work well for a walk-around notebook, if you smeared it, you wouldn't have a problem reading it. It would recover without a problem. That is all that I have for the writing sample.
Instead of finding inks that look like Robert Oster's Moss, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. And with this green, I was really thinking of a nice lighter brown. I went with Robert Oster's Khaki, because it was like a natural, something like that kind of feeling. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Robert Oster's Moss? This is an ink that is an example of why I don't find swabs to be the most accurate representation of what the ink is going to look like writing. It's why I prefer writing samples. This is not a green I run to. The only spot I actually found where I really liked how this green looked was with a broad wet nib on Clairefontaine paper. Yeah, not on Rhodia, not on Tomoe River, not on Fabriano. So it was just so specific where this looked good that unless you always write with a broad and always on Clairefontaine, I don't, so that makes it not for me. This wasn't a good green for me, and I love green inks. Thanks for watching.